The morning sun shone through the crystal walls of the Galactic Xenobiology Academy. The building floated peacefully in space, orbiting the beautiful world of Velthara Prime. Inside the academy, students from many different alien species walked through the halls carrying their books and talking quietly. Yuna sat in the back row of the lecture hall trying to make herself invisible. At 19 years old, she was one of only 3 humans in the entire academy. Her long black hair fell over her face as she looked down at her notebook. She could hear the other students whispering about her again. "That's the human girl," said Nari, a floating creature made of light and energy. "I heard her planet is so dangerous that most species can't even visit it." "Earth is a Class 12 death world," whispered Vexitar, whose green plant-like body swayed gently. "The gravity alone would crush most of us." Yuna pretended not to hear them. She loved studying alien life forms and wanted to become a xenobiologist more than anything. But everywhere she went, people only saw her as a dangerous creature from a deadly world. Professor Kale entered the classroom, the tall crystal being sparkled in the light as he moved to the front. His body was made of beautiful blue crystals that rang like bells when he walked. The Velthari people were known for being very smart and very peaceful. "Good morning, students," Professor Kale said in his musical voice. "Today we will study the feeding habits of the Zorathi species." Yuna opened her notebook and began taking notes. She found alien biology fascinating. Every species had evolved differently on their homeworlds. The Nimari, like Nari, had evolved from energy creatures on a world of pure light. The Silvani, like Vextar, grew from intelligent plants on worlds with perfect climates. The door opened and Dohyun walked in. Yuna's older brother was 24 and worked as a teaching assistant at the academy. He was tall and moved quietly, but Yuna noticed how some students shifted away from him as he passed. Even though Dohyun was gentle and kind, the other students feared him because he was human. "Sorry I'm late, Professor," Dohyun said, placing a stack of papers on the desk. "The research lab needed extra help this morning." "No problem, Dohyun," Professor Kale replied. "Please take a seat. We were just beginning." As the lecture continued, Yuna took careful notes. She loved learning about how different species adapted to their environments. The Zorathi were small, peaceful creatures that ate only plants. They lived on a world with no predators and had never learned to fight or defend themselves. The Zorathi are excellent examples of evolution in peaceful environments, Professor Kale explained. Without predators or natural disasters, they developed high intelligence but no defensive capabilities. Yuna raised her hand. "Professor, what happens when peaceful species encounter predators for the first time?" Some students turned to look at her. She could see fear in their eyes, as if her question itself was dangerous. "An interesting question, Yuna," Professor Kale said thoughtfully. "Most peaceful species simply cannot survive such encounters. This is why the Galactic Council maintains strict laws against violence, and why predator species are banned from civilized space." Nari floated closer to her study partner. "Yuna, you ask such scary questions sometimes." "I'm sorry," Yuna said quietly. "I was just curious about adaptation and survival." "It's quite all right," Professor Kale assured her. "Scientific curiosity is welcome here. However, we must remember that most civilized species have evolved beyond the need for such primitive responses." Yuna felt her cheeks grow warm. She knew the professor didn't mean to hurt her feelings, but his words stung. Everything about humans was seen as primitive by the rest of the galaxy. Their emotions, their history of conflict, their ability to eat almost anything, it all marked them as barely civilized. During break time, Yuna sat alone in the cafeteria. The food was specially prepared for her biology, since most alien food would make humans sick. She ate quietly while watching the other students interact. They were all so gentle with each other. No raised voices, no arguments, no conflict of any kind. Vextar approached her table cautiously. "May I sit with you, Yuna?" "Of course," Yuna said, surprised. Few students ever tried to talk to her outside of class. "I wanted to apologize if my comment earlier made you uncomfortable." Vexitar said, his leaves rustling softly. I have been curious about human culture but afraid to ask directly. It's okay, Yuna replied. Most people are curious about humans, and afraid of us too. Is it true that your planet has creatures that hunt other creatures for food? Yuna nodded. Yes, Earth has predators and prey. It's part of the natural balance. Vextar's entire body shivered. How terrible. On my world, all life forms live in harmony. We share nutrients through root systems and never compete. That sounds peaceful, Yuna said. She wanted to explain that Earth's system wasn't terrible, just different, but she didn't want to scare Vextar away. Do-hyun joined them at the table. Hello, Vextar. How are your studies going? Very well, thank you, Vextar replied, though he moved slightly away from Do-hyun. Your sister was telling me about Earth's ecosystem. Yuna knows more about biology than most professors, Do-hyun said proudly. She's been studying alien life forms since she was 12 years old. Really? Vexitar seemed impressed. That's quite young to begin advanced studies. Humans mature quickly, Yuna explained. We have to adapt fast on our world. The conversation continued and Yuna began to feel hopeful. Maybe she could make friends here after all. Maybe the other students would see that humans weren't just dangerous creatures from a death world. As they talked, Nari floated over to join them. I hope you don't mind if I listen, she said. I've never spoken to humans before. We're happy to answer questions, Yuna said. Is it true that humans can survive in many different environments? Nari asked. Yes, Do-hyun answered. We're very adaptable. Humans live in deserts, frozen areas, high mountains, and even underwater cities. Amazing, Nari whispered. Most species can only survive in very specific conditions. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Yuna felt like she belonged. The other students were asking genuine questions instead of just fearing her. Maybe things would be different here. Maybe she could prove that humans deserved a place in civilized galactic society. The break ended, and they returned to class. Professor Ein Kyle continued his lecture about peaceful species and their evolution. Yuna took notes and participated in discussions. She felt more confident now, surrounded by students who seemed willing to learn about humans. None of them knew that their peaceful world was about to change forever. The afternoon lecture was about advanced alien genetics when everything changed. Professor Kale was explaining how different species evolved different traits when red light suddenly flashed throughout the academy. A loud alarm rang through the halls. Students looked around in confusion. Most of them had never heard an emergency alarm before. The academy was known as one of the safest places in the galaxy. Professor Kale's crystal body began to glow brighter, which happened when Velthari became worried. He touched a panel on his desk and a hologram appeared in the air. The image showed a damaged spaceship approaching the academy. Attention all students and faculty, came a voice over the speakers. This is Academy security. An unknown vessel has breached our defensive systems. All students must remain in their classrooms until further notice. Yuna felt her stomach tighten. She looked at Do-hyun, who had moved closer to the front of the room. Her brother's face was calm, but she could see tension in his shoulders that the other students would miss. Professor, what kind of ship is that? Asked Nari, her glowing form flickering with fear. Professor Kyle studied the hologram more closely. His musical voice became worried. I believe that is a Karathi raider vessel. The entire classroom went silent. Even Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. The Karathi were the most feared species in the galaxy. They were 8 feet tall with razor-sharp claws and teeth designed for tearing flesh. Unlike every other species in civilized space, the Karathi loved violence and conquest. But Karathi are banned from this sector, Vextar said, his plant body shaking. The Galactic Council made laws against them coming near peaceful worlds. Laws don't matter to raiders, Do-hyun said quietly. All the students turned to look at him, especially if their ship is damaged and they need supplies. How do you know about raiders? Asked another student, a bird-like creature named Kira. Do-hyun didn't answer right away. Yuna knew her brother had studied military history as part of his research into human culture. Most aliens didn't understand why humans would study warfare, but Do-hyun believed it was important to understand all aspects of different species. "I've read about Karathi tactics," Do-hyun finally said. "They attack soft targets when their ships are damaged, places with valuable resources and no defenses." "The Academy has defenses," Professor Kale said, but his voice didn't sound confident. "Designed to stop accidents and natural disasters," Do-hyun replied. "Not military attacks." The hologram showed the Karathi ship getting closer. Dark smoke poured from one of its engines and burn marks covered its hull. This was definitely a damaged raider ship looking for an easy target. Suddenly, the Academy shook. Emergency lights flashed brighter as something hit the outer hull. Students cried out in fear as books fell from shelves and equipment rattled. "They're docking," Do-hyun said, standing up. "Professor, we need to lock the doors and find another way out." "Lock the doors?" Professor Kale looked confused. "But if they need help, we should offer assistance. Perhaps their ship needs repairs." Yuna stared at her professor. She realized that he truly didn't understand what was happening. None of the peaceful species understood predators or violence. They had no concept of creatures that would hurt others on purpose. "Professor," Yuna said gently, "Karathi don't ask for help. They take what they want." Another impact shook the Academy. This time they heard the sound of metal tearing as something broke through the hull. Emergency systems activated, sealing off the damaged sections to prevent air from escaping into space. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors outside their classroom. The steps were too heavy to be from any of the Academy species. They were getting closer. "Everyone moved to the back of the room," Do-hyun said, his voice calm but firm. "Why?" asked Kira. "If they need help, shouldn't we greet them properly?" Before Do-hyun could answer, the classroom door exploded inward. Metal pieces scattered across the floor as a massive figure filled the doorway. The Karathi war leader stood 8 feet tall, covered in dark armor. His claws were as long as kitchen knives, and his teeth gleamed in the emergency lighting. Behind him, 6 more Karathi warriors pushed into the room, their eyes scanning the students like predators sizing up prey. The alien students froze in absolute terror. They had never seen a predator before, never experienced the primal fear that comes from facing a creature designed to kill. Their peaceful evolution had never prepared them for this moment. "Well, well," the war leader said in a rough voice. "What do we have here? A classroom full of soft little scholars?" Professor Kale stepped forward, his crystal body shaking. "Greetings. I am Professor Kale. If you need assistance with your ship, we have excellent engineering facilities." The Karathi war leader laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "We don't need repairs, Crystal Thing. We need fresh meat for the fighting pits." "Fighting pits?" Professor Kale didn't understand. "Gladiator games," the war leader explained, enjoying the professor's confusion. "Rich Karathi pay good money to watch soft aliens try to fight. Most die in the first round, but that's half the fun." The other warriors spread out around the room, examining the students. They made comments about which ones looked strongest, which ones might last longest in the arena. "This floating light thing might be interesting," one warrior said, pointing at Nari. "The plant creature could be exotic," said another, reaching toward Vextar with his claws. Yuna watched her friends shake with fear. These gentle beings had never faced violence in their entire lives. They didn't know how to run, how to hide, or how to fight back. Their species had evolved beyond such needs, leaving them helpless against predators. The war leader's eyes settled on Yuna. "And what's this? A bipedal species I don't recognize." He moved closer, studying her with the eye of someone who had captured many different creatures. "You're not as soft as the others. What world are you from, little female?" Yuna felt something change inside her as the massive predator approached. All her life she had tried to be gentle and peaceful like the other students. She had hidden her human nature, pretended to be civilized like the rest of galactic society. But as the Karathi war leader reached toward her with claws designed for killing, something ancient awakened in her mind. Something that had kept her species alive on a world where everything wanted to kill them. "I'm from Earth," she said quietly. The war leader paused. Earth? Never heard of it. Must be some backwater farming world. Behind him, Do-hyun was moving slowly along the wall, positioning himself between the other warriors and the students. Yuna saw her brother's careful movements and knew he felt it too. The awakening of instincts their people had carried for millions of years. It's not a farming world, Yuna said, her voice growing steadier. It's a death world. The war leader laughed again. Death world? You soft little thing? I doubt that very much. He reached out with one massive claw to grab her arm. That's when everything changed. The moment the Karathi war leader's claw touched Yuna's arm, something incredible happened. The gentle student who had been trying to fit in with peaceful aliens disappeared. In her place stood something the galaxy had never truly understood, a human protecting her pack. Yuna moved faster than anyone in the room could follow. She grabbed the war leader's massive wrist and twisted, using his own strength against him. The 8-foot-tall predator found himself spinning through the air, completely off balance. The other students watched in shock as their quiet classmate threw a creature 3 times her size across the room. The war leader crashed into a desk, sending books and equipment flying everywhere. Impossible, breathed Professor Kale. But Yuna wasn't finished. As the war leader tried to stand, she was already moving again. Every step was calculated, every movement had a purpose. She had transformed from a scared student into something the Karathi had never encountered before, a Deathworlder in full combat mode. The war leader roared and swung his claws at her. Yuna ducked under the attack and struck upward with her palm, hitting a pressure point on his throat. The massive alien gasped and stumbled backward. "Brothers, help me!" the war leader called to his warriors. But Do-hyun was already in motion. Yuna's older brother moved like water, flowing between 2 Karathi warriors before they could react. He picked up a broken piece of desk and used it to block a claw strike, then spun and struck the warrior's knee joint with perfect precision. Alien warrior collapsed, his leg unable to support his weight. Do-hyun was already moving to the next threat, his movement smooth and efficient. The watching students couldn't believe what they were seeing. The 2 humans they had thought were primitive and barely civilized were defeating the galaxy's most feared predators with ease. "How are they doing this?" Nari whispered to Vextar. "I don't know," the plant being replied, his entire body shaking. "They move like they were born for fighting." Yuna dodged another claw swipe and grabbed the attacker's arm. She used his momentum to flip him over her shoulder, sending him crashing into the wall. The Karathi warrior hit the crystal surface hard and slumped to the floor, unconscious but still breathing. Do-hyun faced 2 warriors at once. One swung massive claws at his head while the other attacked his legs. Instead of backing away, Do-hyun stepped forward into the attack. He caught one warrior's wrist and used it to block the other's strike, making them hit each other instead of him. While the 2 Karathi were tangled together, Do-hyun struck nerve points on both their necks. They dropped like stones, alive but completely unconscious. The war leader was back on his feet, fury burning in his yellow eyes. "What are you creatures? You fight like demons!" "We're not demons," Yuna said, breathing hard but still ready to fight. "We're humans. And you just threatened our pack." She moved toward him again, her steps confident and sure. The war leader had size and strength, but Yuna had something he didn't understand. Millions of years of evolution on a world where only the smart and adaptable survived. The war leader tried to grab her with both hands, thinking he could overpower her with brute force. Yuna slipped between his arms like smoke and struck 3 different pressure points on his body in quick succession. His nervous system couldn't handle the precise attacks, and he collapsed to his knees. "Sleep," Yuna said quietly, touching one final pressure point on his neck. The massive Karathi war leader fell forward, unconscious but unharmed. The classroom fell silent except for the sound of Yuna and Do-hyun breathing heavily. 7 Karathi warriors lay unconscious on the floor. Not one of them was seriously injured, but they would all wake up with very sore heads. The alien student stared at the 2 humans in complete shock. Professor Kale's crystal body was glowing so brightly with surprise that he lit up the entire room. "By the eternal crystals," the professor whispered. What just happened here? Yuna looked around at her classmates and saw fear in their eyes, but it was a different kind of fear than before. They weren't afraid of her because she was from a death world anymore. They were afraid because they had just seen what humans were truly capable of. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Yuna said softly. "I know it looked violent." "Violent?" Kira the bird creature spoke in a tiny voice. "You just defeated 7 Karathi, warriors like they were children." "They're not dead," Doyun pointed out, checking each unconscious warrior. "They'll wake up in a few hours with headaches, but no permanent damage." "But how?" Professor Kale asked. "The Karathi are the greatest physical fighters in the galaxy. Their species has never been defeated in direct combat." Yuna sat down heavily in a chair, suddenly feeling very tired. The adrenaline was wearing off, and she was becoming the gentle student again. But something had changed. She couldn't pretend to be harmless anymore. "Every human learns basic combat skills," she explained. "Not because we're violent, but because our world is dangerous. We have to be able to protect ourselves and our families." "But the speed, the precision," Vextar said, his leaves still shaking. "You moved like you knew exactly where to strike them." "Anatomy," Doyun said simply. "We study the biology of different species. Once you understand how a body works, you know where the weak points are. You study other species to learn how to hurt them." Nari's light flickered with horror. "No," Yuna said firmly. "We study them to understand them. The pressure points I use don't cause harm. They just shut down consciousness temporarily. It's the safest way to stop someone without hurting them." Professor Kale was examining one of the unconscious Karathi. "Remarkable. His breathing is normal, his pulse is steady. He really is just sleeping." "Humans have a saying," Dohyun told them. "The greatest victory is one where nobody dies." "Even your enemies?" asked Kira. "Especially our enemies," Yuna replied. "Dead enemies can't become friends later." The alien students looked at each other, trying to understand what they had just learned about humanity. These weren't the primitive, violent creatures they had been told about. These were beings who could fight like demons but chose mercy even in the heat of battle. Academy security finally arrived, led by Captain Thorne, a tall Velthari officer. He stopped in the doorway and stared at the scene. 7 unconscious Karathi, raiders, and 2 calm humans sitting among a group of shaken but unharmed students. "What happened here?" Captain Thorne asked. "The humans saved us," Professor Kale said, his voice full of wonder. "They fought the raiders and protected us all." "Captain," Thorne looked at Yuna and Doyun with new respect. "We've been trying to figure out how to deal with Karathi raiders for years. Our security forces aren't trained for combat." "You don't need to be," Yuna said. "Most problems can be solved without violence. But sometimes when innocent people are in danger, you have to be ready to act." "Is this what humans call being civilized?" Nari asked quietly. Yuna smiled sadly. "It's what we call being responsible." The security team carefully carried away the unconscious Karathi raiders. Captain Thorne had called for a medical team to make sure the aliens were unharmed, even though they had come to kidnap and hurt innocent students. Professor Kale dismissed the other students but asked Yuna and Doyun to stay behind. As the classroom emptied, Yuna noticed how the other students looked at her now. Some seemed afraid, others curious, but all of them saw her differently than before. When they were alone, Professor Kale sat down across from the 2 humans. His crystal body was still glowing brighter than normal, showing his excitement and confusion. "I need to understand what happened here," the professor said. "In all my years of study, I have never seen anything like what you 2 did." "What do you want to know?" Yuna asked. "Everything," Professor Kale replied. "How did you move so fast? How did you know exactly where to strike them? How did you defeat trained warriors without killing them?" Doyun leaned back in his chair. "Professor, what do you know about Earth's environment?" "It's classified as a Class 12 death world," Professor Kale said. "High gravity, dangerous weather, toxic plants, and predatory animals. Most civilized species consider it barely habitable." "That's all true," Yuna said. "But do you know what that means for the creatures that evolved there?" Professor Kale thought for a moment. I suppose they would need to be very strong and tough to survive. More than that, Do-hyun explained, they would need to be adaptable. Earth's environment changes constantly. Seasons bring different temperatures, different food sources, different dangers. Species that can't adapt quickly go extinct. Humans are the ultimate adaptation specialists, Yuna added. We can live in deserts, frozen wastelands, jungles, mountains, even underwater. We can eat almost anything, sleep anywhere, and learn to use tools from our environment. But that doesn't explain your fighting ability, Professor Kale said. Yuna stood up and began pacing, trying to find the right words. Professor, what happens when a prey animal is cornered by a predator? It dies, Professor Kale said simply. On most worlds, yes, but on Earth, prey animals fight back. They use horns, claws, poison, speed, camouflage, anything they can to survive. And predators have to be even smarter and more adaptable to catch them. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, Do-hyun continued. We would chase prey animals for days across continents until they collapsed from exhaustion. But we also had to defend ourselves from much larger and stronger predators. So you developed combat skills for survival, Professor Kale said. Not just combat skills, Yuna corrected. We developed the ability to read body language, predict movement, understand anatomy, work as a team, and think tactically under pressure. All of these things together made us very effective at both hunting and defending ourselves. Professor Kale was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Finally, he asked, but if humans are such effective fighters, why aren't you a violent species like the Karathi? This was the question Yuna had been hoping for. Because fighting wasn't our primary survival strategy, Professor. Cooperation was. Cooperation? Humans are pack animals, Do-hyun explained. A single human couldn't survive on Earth. We needed groups to hunt large animals, defend against predators, raise children, and share knowledge. Violence within the group meant the group would fail. So we evolved strong instincts to protect our pack members, Yuna added. When I saw those Karathi threatening my classmates, every instinct I had screamed at me to defend them. It didn't matter that they were aliens I barely knew. They were part of my group, so I had to protect them. Professor Kale's crystal body began to glow with understanding. You're saying that humans developed fighting abilities not for aggression, but for protection? Exactly, Yuna said. Every human child learns self-defense, but they also learn when not to fight. We have sayings like, the best fight is the one you never have, and a good warrior protects, a great warrior prevents. That's why you didn't kill the Karathi, Professor Kale realized. Even though they threatened you, you chose the minimum force necessary to stop them. Killing them would have been easier, Do-hyun admitted. But unnecessary death weakens the whole galaxy. Those raiders will wake up, and maybe they'll think twice about attacking peaceful places. If we had killed them, other Karathi would just want revenge. Professor Kale stood up and began pacing around the damaged classroom. This changes everything we thought we knew about humans. The Galactic Council has been treating your species as barely controlled savages. We know, Yuna said sadly. That's why I came here. I wanted to prove that humans could be civilized, that we belonged in galactic society. But you were already civilized, Professor Kale said. More civilized than most species because you understand the responsibility that comes with the ability to use violence. There was a soft chime, and Nari floated into the room. Professor, the other students sent me to ask, are we safe now? Yes, child, Professor Kale said gently. The raiders have been taken away and their ship has been secured. But we're not asking about the Karathi, Nari said quietly. We're asking about the humans. Yuna felt her heart sink. She had hoped that saving her classmates would help them see humans differently, but it seemed like she had only made them more afraid. You want to know if you're safe from us, Yuna said. Everyone is scared, Nari admitted. We've never seen anything like what you did. The way you moved, the way you fought. It was like you were completely different people. We are different people when our friends are in danger, Do-hyun said, but only then. How can we be sure? Nari asked. How do we know you won't hurt us? Yuna looked at her frightened classmate and felt a deep sadness. This was why humans had trouble fitting into galactic society. Other species couldn't understand that strength and gentleness could exist in the same being. Nari, Yuna said softly, I've been in classes with you for 6 months. Have I ever hurt you? Have I ever threatened anyone? Have I ever lost my temper or acted violent toward any student here? No, Nari admitted. Then why would I start now? What changed except that you know I'm capable of protecting you? Professor, Kale stepped forward. Students, I want you all to understand something important. What Yuna and Dohyun did today wasn't violence. It was justice. They saw innocents in danger and acted to protect them, using exactly as much force as necessary and no more. But they made it look so easy, Nari whispered. Because they've been preparing for it their whole lives. Professor Kale replied, not because they wanted to hurt others, but because they wanted to be ready to help others when help was needed. Yuna had an idea. Nari, would you like me to teach you some basic self-defense? Nothing violent, just how to get away if someone tries to grab you. You would teach me? Nari seemed surprised. All of us, Yuna said, looking at Professor Kale for permission. I could teach basic safety techniques to any students who want to learn. Not fighting, just how to recognize danger and get to safety. Professor Kale considered this. I think that would be very valuable. After today, we've all learned that the galaxy isn't as safe as we thought. But first, Yuna added, you need to understand the most important lesson about self-defense. What's that? Nari asked. The goal is never to hurt your attacker. The goal is always to protect yourself and others. There's a big difference. For the first time since the attack, Nari's light grew a little brighter. I think I'm beginning to understand what makes humans special. What's that? Professor Kale asked. They're the only species that learn to be strong enough to protect the weak. 3 weeks after the Karathi attack, the Galactic Xenobiology Academy felt like a completely different place. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about what happened in Professor Kale's classroom, and suddenly everyone wanted to understand humans better. Yuna sat in the same classroom where everything had changed, but now it was packed with students from every species in the academy. Her self-defense class had become the most popular course on campus, with a waiting list of over 200 students. Remember, Yuna said to the mixed group of aliens sitting before her, self-defense isn't about fighting. It's about awareness, preparation, and escape. The best way to win a fight is to never be in one. Vextar raised one of his leafy appendages. But what if escape isn't possible? What if someone is trapped like we were? Then you protect yourself and others using the minimum force necessary, Yuna replied. Never more than you need, never less than required. She demonstrated a simple technique for breaking free from a grab, using a volunteer, Kira, the bird creature, who had become one of her most enthusiastic students. The key is to move in unexpected directions, Yuna explained as she gently showed how to slip from someone's grip. Most attackers expect you to pull away. Instead, you move toward them and to the side, using their own balance against them. The students practiced the technique in pairs with Yuna and Dohyun moving around the room to help and correct their form. It was slow work. Most aliens had never thought about physical conflict before, but they were learning. Professor Kale entered the classroom carrying a data pad. His crystal body was glowing with excitement, which had become common since he started researching human culture and biology. Students, I have remarkable news, he announced. The Galactic Council has just issued a new classification for humanity. Everyone stopped practicing and turned to listen. Yuna felt her heart race. Classifications determined how species were treated by galactic law. If humans had been reclassified as a dangerous species, it could mean restrictions on their travel and education. Humans are no longer listed as barely civilized Deathworlder, Professor Kale continued. The new classification is Protective Peacekeepers, Class A Allied Species. The room erupted in excited chatter from the alien students. Yuna felt tears in her eyes. Finally, the galaxy was beginning to understand what humans really were. What does that mean exactly? Asked Nari, floating closer to the professor. It means humans are now recognized as a species that uses their natural abilities to protect others rather than harm them, Professor Kale explained. They're being invited to join the Galactic Peace Corps as advisors and trainers. The Peace Corps? Dohyun looked surprised. But that's made up of the most respected species in the galaxy. And now it includes humans, Professor Kale said proudly. After what happened here and similar reports from other human colonies, the Council realizes that humanity has something the galaxy desperately needs. What's that? Yuna asked. The ability to stand between predators and prey without becoming predators themselves. Kira fluttered her wings excitedly. Does this mean more humans will come to the Academy? Many more, Professor Kale confirmed. There are already requests from dozens of universities and research stations. They want human advisors to help develop safety protocols and emergency response procedures. Yuna looked around at her classmates, aliens who had once feared her simply for being human. Now they saw her as a protector and teacher. The change was remarkable. Professor, Vextar said, I've been wondering about something. If humans evolved these protective instincts, why didn't other Deathworld species develop the same traits? Professor Kale's body sparkled with pleasure at the scientific question. Excellent observation, Vextar. I've been researching this exact topic. He activated a holographic display showing different planets and species. Most Deathworld species evolved primarily as predators or prey. They developed either hunting instincts or hiding instincts. Humans are unique because they evolved as both. Both? Nari sounded confused. Humans were prey to larger predators, so they developed pack cooperation and defensive skills, the professor explained. But they were also persistence hunters, who took down much larger animals through teamwork and intelligence. This dual evolution created a species that could fight like predators, but think like prey, always considering the safety of the group. That's why we instinctively protect others, Yuna added. Our ancestors survived by keeping the whole group safe, not just themselves. A new student entered the room, a tall, armored being that Yuna didn't recognize. Professor Kale's light dimmed slightly with concern. Ah, everyone, we have a special visitor today. This is Commander Thax of the Karathi Redemption Fleet. The alien students immediately tensed up. The Karathi were still the most feared species in the galaxy, even though this one wore different armor than the raiders who had attacked them. Commander Thax stepped forward, his voice deep but respectful. I have come to speak with the humans, who defeated war leader Thrakvan and his raiders. Yuna and Dohyun exchanged glances. This could be a challenge or a threat, but Yuna noticed something different about this Karathi. His posture wasn't aggressive, and his claws were retracted, in a gesture of peace. I am Yuna, and this is my brother Dohyun, Yuna said carefully. I bring words from the 7 warriors you defeated, Commander Thax said. When they woke up, they were confused. They had never been beaten in combat before, but they were also unharmed. This was impossible to understand. We don't fight to kill, Dohyun explained. We fight to protect. Yes, this is what they learned. War leader Thrakvan spent many days thinking about this. He asked me to deliver a message. Commander Thax reached into his armor and pulled out a small crystal tablet. He says, the humans showed me what true strength looks like. It is not the power to destroy, but the wisdom to preserve. I wish to learn this strength. The classroom was completely silent. No one had ever heard of a Karathi asking to learn from another species. The war leader wants to join your self-defense classes? Yuna asked, hardly believing it. All 7 of the defeated warriors do, Commander Thax confirmed. They wish to understand how to fight without hate, how to be strong without being cruel. Professor Kale's light grew so bright he illuminated the entire room. Remarkable. If the Karathi can learn peaceful strength from humans, imagine what other changes might be possible. Yuna looked at her classmates, Nimari, Silvani, Veltari, and now even Karathi. all wanting to learn from humans. The species that had once been seen as barely civilized was now teaching the galaxy about civilization itself. "Commander Thax," she said, "tell the war leader and his warriors they are welcome in our classes, but they must understand the first rule." "What is the first rule?" the Karathi asked. "We are all here to learn how to protect each other. That means every person in this room is under everyone else's protection. Human, Karathi, Nimari, Silvani, we are all one pack now." Commander Thax's fearsome face showed something that looked almost like a smile. "The war leader said you would say something like this. He said humans see enemies as future friends waiting to be discovered." As the alien students resumed their practice, now with a Karathi observer taking notes, Yuna felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The killer who had walked into their class had left everyone speechless, not because of fear but because of hope. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy at last. Not as conquerors or subjects, but as the guardians who stood ready to protect anyone who needed protection. The death world that had forged them had given the galaxy something precious, a species strong enough to fight for peace, wise enough to choose mercy, and brave enough to stand between predators and prey. The lesson was over, but the real education was just beginning. Throughout the galaxy, species that had never known conflict were learning that sometimes the greatest act of peace is the willingness to fight for others who cannot fight for themselves. And in a classroom orbiting a peaceful world, a human teacher smiled as she watched former enemies practice protecting each other, proving that the most dangerous thing in the universe wasn't a Deathworlder's capacity for violence. It was their capacity for turning enemies into family.